Welcome to episode 73 of Kontrarian Korner. I'm Ben Kellerin. Today we have a very special return guest, everyone's favorite professor from Cornell, to talk with us about everything from markets to current events to his conversation with Tucker and everything else going on in the world and whether or not the shit is about to hit the fan. But I think it'll be a very interesting conversation. So, Dave, thanks for coming back on.
It's my pleasure. The first one I did was something like what number was it? Do you happen to remember?
It was like 5 or 6. It was one of the first 10 for sure.
Single digit. Yeah, it was single digit. And somehow you survived that. So, that could have been a nip it, smother it in the crib sort of thing. But you didn't. So in any case, yes, I'm glad to be back. These are fun. You young guys are way more educated than I ever was at your age about this kind of stuff. Now, I didn't pay any attention whatsoever I knew nothing about geopolitics when I was your age. I learned stuff from my dad when I was a kid, but once I got to college, I was just, chemistry, biology, chemistry, the whole way, just nothing but that.
Well, I think part of it is that you almost didn't have to be as have as broad of a focus on current events and all this other stuff as you do now because of like the impacts that some of these events can have on financial markets and can have on the world. And I think that's part of the things one of the things I've started to realize is that when you're paying attention to markets and trying to figure out where capital is going to flow, whether it's going to go into the US, out of the US, into Europe, some of these different places, the geopolitical side, especially with the changes we've been seeing, is a big part of that calculus. And it's changing very quickly. But before we get into some of those topics, I do have a bone to pick with you because you basically gave me one of the podcast pet peeves of all these other podcasts talking about, oh, before we started recording, we were talking about this, X, Y, and Z, whatever. And now I hear it like every second podcast of, oh, before we started recording, we talked about this.
A brain worm.
You gave that to me. I give people one free pass when I hear it, but now it's I hear it everywhere. So you've been able to give that same pet peeve that you have.
You can't unhear it. You can't unhear it. It's here's one for you that I will tell you about that you probably didn't notice. I thought I found myself doing it, and then I thought I learned it from a friend who I noticed doing it. But we all say, yeah, no, back to back. Someone will say, oh, yeah, this guy's nuts. And you go, yeah, no, and you won't even know you just said yes and no simultaneously. Everyone does it. I see it in movies, TV shows, newscasters. Absolutely everyone does it. You will not be able to unhear it now.
Well, I'll keep an eye out for it. I'm sure it'll come up at some point. But I did want to get into some of the stuff on financial markets that we were talking about before we recorded. But the thing that I think is interesting.
I'm hanging up.
Some of the stuff that I think is interesting is some of the stuff going on in AI land and market valuations, all this stuff. But I did want to start actually with what you're actually bullish on right now, like certain assets you're seeing opportunities, whether it's precious metals or other things. And obviously they've had a pretty big run recently, but want to maybe kind of get into where if you're seeing any opportunities in certain parts of the market, or if really it's just kind of turned into the passive feeding frenzy into tech stocks and into other stuff that just doesn't make a lot of sense. So what are maybe a couple things that you're bullish on right now?
Well, I like my portfolio right now just because if you take away the fixed income, which you have very little control over, and probably 40+% of my over 50% of my portfolio is in uncontrollable stuff like that. I could get out of it, but it's fixed income. If you take that away, the other stuff, the stuff I control, the stuff that I would call risk assets, I'm up 51% year to date. So in theory, should be really bullish. Actually, I'm quite bearish. As a qualifier, I don't think there's anything on the planet that's not a risk of going down significantly. I don't think there's a single thing. So I'm bullish on 2-year treasuries. I have this year been bullish on platinum, and I made that call one of the few. It's one of the few sort of timing calls I've ever made. So I started buying gold in '99 and kept buying it, and it kept going down, and it's turned out to be a brilliant call. I mean, it's up 20-fold or something from the. I was buying it at 270 an ounce in a closed-end fund that was trading at 28% below net asset value. So you can do the math; it's around 210 an ounce. So that's just a ridiculous leap. But I averaged in over a number of years, from maybe '99 up through 2003. And you could do that. Markets move very quickly now, so you don't really have the luxury of averaging in over 4 years, unless it's a real big long-term play. Like, I could imagine averaging into uranium over 4 years, something like that. Uranium-based stuff. The problem the markets have now, besides, and we've talked about this before, I don't think I should probably repeat myself, but the last 40 years is a terrible recency bias. So anyone who shows you a plot that compares where we're at now to any time in the last 40 years is either not seeing the big picture or lying to you. Because the entire last 30 years, the markets have been overvalued. And sometimes profoundly, but like in February of '09, they were fair value, their historical average valuation. I had to add it. I write this annual year in review, which I'm not humping now, but it's part of the story. It can run up as high as 300 pages. I do not know how I'm going to get 300 pages out of it this year, but Bob Moriarty is binding all of the years back to '09, and we've done about 3/4 of them now. And they're not going to sell. I mean, in some sense, it's a posterity thing, but I've had to edit them. It's probably 3,000 or 4,000 pages. And something has changed. That's what I noticed. Going back through them, something has changed. And what I can tell you is by 2015, which is 10 years ago, so it makes for a nice round number, we had pulled out of the depths of the hole we were in. We were still sort of piecing together what had happened and stuff and changes that occurred. And the markets were already way over historical average valuation. And that's just not me. That's just not my opinion. It's based on metrics. It's based on plots. It's based on some of the smartest guys on the planet saying the markets are psychotic again. How did this happen? Guys like Druckenmiller saying, look, we're going to go off a cliff soon and it's going to be a total disaster. This is 15. And then you say, well, what happens in 15? And it's been straight up. And so to say the market's overvalued now is not a hard sell based on that. This bubble is different than the other bubbles, in my opinion. And I've been thinking about what makes it so different. Every other bubble I know, there was a euphoria. The railroad bubbles, the 1929. We'd just gone through the Roaring '20s. There was no reason to not be enthusiastic. The Japanese 1989 looks like they totally reinvented capitalism. So that bubble we're sending teams to Japan to figure out how they were managing their companies, not realizing it was just a big ass bubble. And then the dot-com bubble, we really felt like we'd changed the world. Unfortunately, I think we have. I'm not sure it was for the good, but this one doesn't. The real estate bubble, even everyone was getting a house, living the American dream, so there was this real euphoria. I think this bubble's weird because I think we all know it's nuts. And some people are saying that's why there's so much left to run, because we're not euphoric yet. And I go, I don't think we're ever going to get euphoric. I believe that we know it's nuts. If it gets higher, we'll know it's nuttier. It is what I call a complacency bubble. And some people call it the everything bubble, which means it's like a stage 4 cancer. It's gotten into everything. And I agree with that. But the complacency bubble is, when I do podcasts, I read comment sections and stuff, and I see so many people saying, you've been wrong for so many years. When are you going to admit it? I go, I'll admit it when we're back to a historical average valuation. Nothing bad happened. So the complacency bubble is that everyone in the market seems to know it's nuts, but has this belief that the market will somehow just always be saved. And that's just not solid thinking. You're kind of retarded thinking that way. But that is how people are thinking. And so they say, well, the Fed won't let it happen. I go, okay, how are they going to stop it? Oh, they're going to print their way out. And I said, so we're going to have rampant inflation. Did you ever live through the 70s? Which is nothing compared to some other places in the world. But let's take the 70s for us. It was awful. It was really awful. So I believe the Fed will not save us, cannot save us, never will be able to save us because you can't inflate your way out of overvaluation. It is mathematical nonsense, it turns out, because evaluation is the price over some metric, book, revenue, Tobin's, whatever. Both the numerator and the denominator are inflation adjusted. They're inflation sensitive. And so by inflating, you'll increase the revenues and the price. You increase the earnings and the price, you know. And so you can't inflate your way out of the bubble. What you can do is cause so much inflation that the returns you're getting look shitty. And therefore you say, I got to get out of these assets because I'm going broke. So right now, I follow about 25 metrics, but the Case-Shiller PE average from 1880 to 1990 was about 12, 13, somewhere in there. And then it left orbit. Actually, there's a year that all the metrics left orbit. 1994. I'm still laboring over what happened in 1994. Michael Green says, well, index investing. I go, but there was no discontinuity in index investing. This thing left orbit in 1990. Look at any valuation metric, and you will see 1994 is the year that it left the channel and never looked back. So now it's sitting around 40. So if Case-Shiller, which is a sort of a smoothed over price earnings ratio, if it's at 40 versus a historical average valuation of 12, 13, you're looking at 200%. You're looking at a 70% correction to get back to historical average, which is required to be at to get historical returns going forward. And if you want to say, hey, we're just going to sit up here forever, you have to accept two things. One is you have to accept the fact that you're priced to get about a 2.5% return. The second thing you're going to have to accept is this idea that you will be involved in a market, the first market in history that got way overvalued, that didn't find its way back to cheap. And I guarantee you there will be no such market. That will not happen because that's not how markets behave. That's like saying I'm going to live to be 150. I go, no, you're not. And so at some point in the future, the markets will get back to cheap. And that journey from here to there, path independent, it's going to be so ugly.
Yeah. I think one of the things you're getting at too is like the real return versus nominal as far as like the inflation side of things.
You have to inflation correct. You have to inflation correct.
And that's one of the things that drives me up the wall, where people get so locked in on like the CPI or like some of these different inflation measures. And I don't need to like explain to you how those are all bullshit, but like the whole thing with inflation being 2.9 or 3%. And when I see, like when I go grocery shopping or all these different things, it's not anywhere below 5. And that's coming down from where it was a couple of years ago. And I think when you start to see like this, there's even more talk about debasement and like big banks putting out reports on some of that stuff now that are circulating. And it's like, would have been a better time to write that with gold at 2,500 than 4,000, but here we are. And you kind of see like the talk becoming louder and louder on the inflation side, on all these different things. And when I look at it, if you get oil really start to move, then you're really going to see like that inflation genie come back out of the bottle, because that's where it shows up in gas prices and in everything else. And I think
everything liquid.
Well, right. That's the thing is like, it's not just transportation and like all the supply chain stuff. It's everything. Clothes, it's products, I mean, you can go down the list. And I think that's where if you get oil making a significant move, I think there's signs that it's coming in the next couple of years. I think you're going to see the next wave of inflation be just as bad as it was in 21 and 22. And I think if you look at what happens with gold and tending to lead other things, you see copper starting to move and oil tends to go after that. I think there's a decent chance that sometime in the next 12 months, oil's really starting to head higher. But what's your kind of view on inflation being a massive problem if we're in for an inflationary decade with cycles and other things, or if it's going to be like a massive bust and people because my kind of view of it is that they're always going to kick the can. They're always going to choose inflation over like, oh, hey, we're going to sacrifice the bond market, whatever your path A, path B choice is. They're always going to choose inflation. So what's your kind of view on where that takes us over the next decade?
Higher prices. Yeah, they'll always choose inflation, but it doesn't. The fact they choose it almost by definition means it's not the best way to go, because they're never going to choose the best path. It's hard to say the sequence of events that'll get us there. So it drives me nuts whenever I do a podcast and I look at the title of the podcast when it boots up and Collum predicts huge crash. I've never predicted a crash. In fact, my model is antithesis of a crash. It's antithetical to a crash. My model is that we're going to rot for decades. It's just going to be the big rot. And I think we're going to go down, then we'll rally back, then we'll go down, then we'll rally back. And somewhere when you're about 50 goddamn years old, you will say, I am never buying another equity again. I'm never buying a risk asset again. That'll be the bottom, right? And I think by my math, if we tread water by path independent, I don't care if you go up or down, I don't care if the NASDAQ goes to 100,000, path independent, inflation adjusted, 45 years from now, we will be at exactly the same price, inflation adjusted. 45 years is my math. It's arithmetic. It's not, that's assuming 2.5% growth in GDP. That's how long it takes to grow your way out of a 200% over historical average valuation. And no one's been able to torch this. I read the comment section, oh, he's just a boomer. That's not an argument, right? It's a fact, but it's not an argument. And so if you own the 1929 top, you were even inflation adjusted in 1983, I think it was. Now you got higher than that along the way, but in 1983, you look back, just go look at an inflation adjusted S&P or something and draw a line from any of the major tops straight across and say, when did I get back to that same price for the last time? Not the first time, the last time. I would love to talk about the first time. When's the last time? And it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime away. And so the Dow inflation adjusted, depending on how you adjust it, the Dow or S&P in the 20th century averaged about 2% capital gains. Then the rest you got from dividends, which averaged about 4%. But what are our dividends now? The lowest in history, which is another valuation metric. If dividends are 1/4 what they used to be, then it means we're fourfold overvalued, right? It means you're not kicking off any cash flow. Now, we can live without kicking off a cash flow, right? You can own a business that doesn't make any or doesn't have capital gains, right? If you own a gas station, pays out, a revenue stream, which right now, according to the numbers, the S&P is priced to return about a 2.5% dividend stream. With record profit margins. But you can't count on capital gains to make you rich. That gas station's not going to make you rich by just sitting on it. And so the cash flow is all you got. And I don't think we're going to even get that. So I put a gun to my head and say, buy a risk asset. Buy a risk asset. Then I'm not qualified to go to faraway lands. So you read Jeremy Grantham and say, buy, Indonesian value companies, right? I go, who the fuck knows what that is? I mean, who the hell's qualified to buy Indonesian companies that are valued? By the way, generally, it's a bad idea to invest in regions of the world that don't have a well-established history of creating wealth, right? Even if you invested in China, which had no well-established history of creating wealth, but seemed to have done so, it hasn't done that well. I mean, it's not been a brilliant move. Japan's return off of World War II, if you boom and bust the whole thing, is like 3%. So it's nothing special. And so I'm not qualified to do that. I like energy because it's global. So if there's a boom somewhere, they're using energy, right? So I don't need to identify where the boom is if I buy energy. So you put a gun to my head and said, you know, lockbox 25 years from now, you open it up and you get the profits. You know, energy would be a very good place to be. I'd probably just do some generic, you know, Fidelity funds. I wouldn't do anything fancy. I've got interest in uranium type stuff, Gehring and Rosenzweig. I'm trying to find the people who know a lot more than me and say, okay, you're in charge of investing in uranium. Eric Cinnamon, I've got in my sights to invest in small caps. I believe the problem that we face is that passive investing has caused investing to be mindless. As I've told other people, this is it's an amazing story, actually. I went to a Bogle seminar. I got to walk with him and ride with him on the elevator. And I said to him, I said, John, isn't it true that by taking out massive pension managers of huge companies and huge organizations who would, when they didn't like what they were seeing in a company, would walk in the CEO's office and say, get your shit together, and replace them with passive investing? Haven't you removed adult supervision from the room? And he said, yes. Bogle, John friggin' Bogle said yes to that. So now you got this mindless investing. Every penny gets invested. You know, you get Mike Green on your show. He'll tell you about it.
He had a conversation recently with David Einhorn. I don't know if you had a chance to watch that one yet.
I have not.
Simplify. I'll send a link to you.
That'd be great. Please write a note for these links because there'll be more before we're done.
Yeah, it was a really good conversation because they get into the passive side and like the private markets and private equity, private credit, all this other stuff. And that's maybe another thing where I wonder.
Oh, I gotta listen to this.
Yeah, it's really interesting because they talk about some of these things, and I do wonder if the private credit, private equity, like businesses staying off of public markets more, if that is a durable change or if that's going to be something that causes issues.
No. The next crisis, the word private will be in every headline of every article describing the crisis. Private equity, private debt, private credit, saving Private Ryan, protecting your private parts. I don't know what. It'll be in every headline. Private means secret, hidden. The private equity guys are buying up companies that they now can't sell. They're not worth what they paid for them. So no. That's the hidden bubble. That's the hidden thermonuclear weapon, in my opinion. Interesting. You got to send me that link because probably 2 years ago I was having dinner with Einhorn and his lovely girlfriend, Natalie, and we started talking about various players, and I brought up some names. I brought up Cahotas. He said, "Oh yeah, he's great." I said that. Here's one for you. I said, Dalio has a nice pitch about macro and about 6 phases and how we're going into 6 phase. So it's kind of a fourth turning, you know. And I read a couple of his books. And he tells a nice story, but I don't think it's deep. I think it's great. It's kind of a airport bookstore level book analysis, in my opinion. I said to him, I don't think his macro is as good as some people think it is. And Einhorn said the most amazing thing. He said, I now do believe he has a hedge fund. I go, what? And then I ended up digging back. There was a belief on Wall Street that Bridgewater was fake. There really were people saying, we don't see Bridgewater in the trading pits. We don't see him where they're supposed to be visible. You know, the old where was Epstein, right? One of those things. I mentioned Mike Green, who I thought David would not know, and he says, "Oh, Green's fantastic. We talk all the time." So that showed me Green's reach, and then I began to realize I underestimated Green. I thought his motto was the simple passive. Green understands way deeper than I gave him credit, and he really understands the details, the guts of the ebbs and flows and stuff. I think Green is now looking at the ebbs and flows, saying we're getting close to the flows turning into ebbs, or what, vice versa. I think if you ask Michael, I think he'd say that he can see the thing rolling over, maybe. And the problem you have is that it was so mindless to buy, and it had this nonlinearity where the more you put into a company, the higher the price, the more you put in. So it's Mike Mulligan's steam shovel for the boomers. And that'll work in reverse. But the other thing is, so let's say I'm a boomer and I've got all my money in an Vanguard equity fund, which, by the way, when an idea becomes broadly based, it's no longer a good idea. And indexing.
What the wise man does in the beginning, the fool does at the end.
That's exactly right. And so you can't say private, indexing isn't broadly based at this point. The problem you have is, so let's say me, Dave, boomer, have an index fund, which I don't. I probably have a little in some stuff that I don't control. And I start getting the creeps. Let's say this AI bubble screwed up. NVIDIA is carried the index fund, blah, blah, blah. I'll get rid of NVIDIA. You can't. You can't surgically get rid of NVIDIA because you're in an index fund. You have one choice: sell the market. And it's a single keystroke. So in the old days, if you had a portfolio of 100 stocks, and you're getting the heebie-jeebies, you go, "Oh, I'm going to hang on to Philip Morris. I'm going to get rid of Pets.com," right? That sort of thing. Now you say, one sell. That's all I can do. I can sell the market, or I can hang on to the market. And as a consequence, you're going to sell the market. And all those value stocks, when the PE was 6 in 1981, half the stocks had a PE below 6. Right? So if you buy a stock now that's a P of 12, you think you're getting 8 or 9% return on investment, that sort of thing, price that if you think of it as a cash flow. Nothing saying it can't become a P of 6. And so I don't think it's a terrible thing to buy, but if you're looking for capital gains to be safe, Hussman analyzed the shit out of this. Hussman looked at the response of the 10 deciles of valuation to big sell-offs, and they all sell about the same. The 10 deciles all go down with the ship. And so we've got this hugely bizarre market. It's the complacency bubble. People think they're going to be saved. The second they realize that there's a hole in their lifeboat, they're going to want to sell. The index funds have no cash. And so if I put in a request to sell $1,000 worth of the S&P 500 fund, they got to sell the shares. They can't just give me $1,000 and hang on to the shares and become like a market maker. They got to sell. And so the minute it starts selling, it's selling. There's some buffer there to stop the selling. So I think that when it starts to roll over, what would do it? Well, boomers getting old, right? I am going to have to live off things that I've profited from. A recession, any sort of global disturbance, in theory, that's what. By the way, I've been thinking about. I'm going to do the ADHD, blind not finds the squirrel sort of thing. I was speculating in 2020 whether they put the markets into an induced coma on purpose. And at the time, COVID was providing cover. But as I've been reading my annual reviews and editing them, we look like we're really headed for a problem. I'm now editing 2018. I've done up to 18 and from, I think, 22 on. So I'm at 18, and it feels like we're heading for a bridge abutment. And then in 19, we had things like the repo spikes and things like that. And I'm wondering if they didn't save the system to die another day in 2020, if maybe I've even thought maybe the COVID story, which was a farce, was created to save the markets, and that it gave the cover necessary to put the markets in an induced calm and provide enough cash so that the whole thing could settle down somehow. Because the repo spikes were late 19. I remember one Saturday night, I was on the phone with Grant Williams for about 2 hours talking about the repo spikes. And we got the end of 2 hours. We both agreed neither of us had any idea what was happening. Not a clue. And so I'm not sure if anyone does. Someone might, but I've never seen a coherent description of why the repo interest rates started spiking up to 10%. They're supposed to be basis points, right? They're spiking to 10%. What the hell was that? Well, that might have been the spasmodic motions that they said we got to do something fast. They, by the way, started doing bizarre monetary policy before COVID really showed up. So they were already in some sort of heroic situation, doing weird stuff behind the scenes. So in any event, our day will come. The price, regression to the mean through the means of force of nature. And I can be wrong remember Bill Miller. He beat the S&P for 13 years in a row. He was a superhero, 13 years in a row. The 14th year, he gave all the advantages back in 1 year. So I can be wrong for 13 years and get all the benefits of being wrong for 13 years. And I haven't been wrong for 13 years, but still, you get the idea.
Yeah. I think one of the things, this is maybe an interesting topic, because you kind of mentioned a couple guys that you have on the watch list, but the one thing I'll add in on like recessions, and I think it was Bill Fleckenstein talking about this a while back, where he basically said the layoffs could lead to less inflows, could lead to like selling there, and it could be something
or just no inflows, right? The selling, there's a basal level of selling, and the lack of inflows no longer compensates for that. Then you start to go down.
That was the thing he pointed out, is like the market's not going to read like a recession, and especially when you don't have like the active managers, or I think it's 10% of trading.
Wait a minute, there are active managers? I didn't know that.
Well, that was the next question I had, is like, do you think we get a return of active management over the next 10 years as like all this stuff starts to play out? I think it's almost inevitable because everyone's on the wrong side of the boat. But what's your view there?
Well, there's a regression to the mean too. So the brilliance of markets is that they are. You ever read the book, The Wisdom of Crowds?
Mm-mm.
Oh, you should read that one. That's a profound one. The Wisdom of Crowds. It basically is, if you're on the show, Want to Be a Millionaire, and you ask the audience, they always get it right. Like a 94% correctness by the audience. No one in the audience knows what they're doing, but the collective wisdom is there. There used to be a guy who ran a gift shop in DC, and during election season, he'd have buttons for the two presidential candidates, and people would buy a button for $1, right? And he said without fail, whoever sold the most buttons, whichever team sold the most buttons won the election. Until 2020, probably.
Yeah.
And that's the wisdom of crowds. No one person knows what they're doing, but right at the center of that bell curve is the answer. And so democracy is wisdom of crowds in theory. So we don't know what we're doing, but we collectively, presumably, no evidence supporting this, vote for the right guy. As long as we get handed a choice. And markets are the wisdom of crowds. So the collective wisdom, people buying and selling and stuff like that. Now, the problem is the wisdom of crowds fails when the voting becomes correlated. So if you and I are all voting independently, we'll get it right. The crowd in the Want to Be a Millionaire will get it right. But if you can see what the other people are doing and you start taking cues from them, you lose the wisdom of crowds. And indexing and stuff is losing the wisdom of crowds. Correlation is heading for 1, right? And so you're no longer price discovering. You're no longer doing any of the things that markets are supposed to do. And of course, the Fed, thinking somehow they're in charge of the most important market in history, and that is the money market, where lenders and borrowers meet to set the price of capital, which you can't find a more important market than that, right? That's the foundation of capitalism. They think that the wisdom of crowds doesn't work, and therefore they should set the price of capital. And that tells me they're assholes.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see.
Or crooked, or they're just there to make sure the banks keep raking in money.
Yeah,
which is more likely, actually, which makes them assholes, but that's a separate kind of an asshole.
Yeah, I think it will be something to see as far as market structure, all this other stuff, because I think you, by definition, have to go back to a system that allocates capital based on like actual opportunities, debt, equity, all this other stuff, like the fundamentals of the business. And I think that can be done in public markets, but I don't think it can be done in public markets that are structured the way they're structured now.
Well, right? It also has to be limiting. Limited amounts of capital are a moat for good businessmen. So if you are a good businessman and you can get the loan to build the facility to do the job, and some douchebag who's got lousy credit and stuff can't, then he can't put you out of business. When capital's super loose, anyone can jump in and make a mess of things. My dad taught me that because he was a contractor, and so when capital is worth less, then it makes the decision process worthless. And so you really do want capital to be restrictive. Now, I listen to the guys who say, oh, the Fed's right, they should have dropped rates 50 basis points. I go, what fucking planet are you on? Now I'm insulting all my friends. Right? I'm insulting people I'm going to see in November at a meeting. I'm insulting everyone because they're all saying, I'm insulting Lacey Hunt, for God's sakes. I'm insulting everyone. Because everyone will agree that the Fed totally boned it because they kept rates too low for too long. And to that, I add too many times. And now they're saying they have to lower rates. What kind of stupid thinking is that? But very smart people are saying, how about letting people hit some bridge abutments? How about letting some of that shit get washed out of there? How about hiking rates? How about blowing out those worthless office buildings that are in private equity portfolios not being priced to value? They're not being marked to market. And we should talk about private equity because it is a colossal fraud now. And they're trying to shove it into the portfolios of Joe Sixpack. Joe Sixpack should lock and load when that happens. At that point, it's time to do a civil war. Joe Sixpack should get out the guillotines, go to Wall Street, and put it to him because if they manage, especially if they manage to put the private equity in Joe Sixpack's retirements without them knowing it, without them having the ability to say yes. It's bad enough to say, hey, I got a great deal here, and have the person be stupid enough to take it. But what if it just gets slipped in there and they're trying to juice returns, and you don't even know that they're sticking toxic waste into your retirement package? And then I'll say, my bad, sorry, you lost all your money. It's like, how about my bad, I blew your ass off? I know, I just can't imagine. And by the way, if this is a market top, which I think it's got to be close, it's certainly close to the top to the bottom, right? We can agree on that. I've never seen a grumpier bunch of people at market tops. This is not a normal mania. This is a mania where people think they're going to be protected. Life sucks. Things suck. Politics sucks. Wall Street sucks. But I'm making some money, and they're going to protect it. And when that turns out to be the lie, they're going to be. What's it going to look like at the bottom? Oh my God.
Yeah,
depressing.
I think the thing that I'm curious to see how it all plays out is with kind of the mentality and some of the different attitudes towards like Wall Street, private equity, and some of the generational things. I think that's going to be the biggest part. Is if you have this kind of generational turnover, I think there's going to be a lot of things that change, and that's maybe an interesting segue into current events.
Like the price.
Well, that too, but like I think there's like a big chunk of the younger generations that just look at like the whole American dream idea as, okay,
God.
how do you get from here to wife, kids, white picket fence, all that stuff? And it's not with houses at 10 to 15 times income, and it's not with any of these things with wages where they are, right? It's not with older generations importing the third world to compete for those wages, right? It's not with university and
AI coming in and knocking your job out. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, we can't get the Guatemalans. Let's just bring in a computer.
Yeah, that's the thing is like you have all these different developments that are basically just ladders coming up behind us, and that's like all there is. And I think eventually there's a point where it's just like, okay, if there's no if the society doesn't build a system that has like an ability to basically get out of the rat race or whatever you want to call it for younger generations, if there's no benefit to upholding the current system, then that system's not going to be around for long, right? Because that's like the existential side of it, where if you don't have certain things that are a possibility, then literally nothing else matters, right? Whether it's, okay, I want wife and kids, and like you see what kind of happens when a big enough percent of the population gets agitated over stuff like that, and it's not pretty usually. So
well, look at this guy Mamdani, right? I mean, he looks like a sack of shit and a bad idea. But what's interesting is I think there's a lot of people looking at Mamdani, maybe even including me, going, "This is what you get. Don't bitch about Mamdani. This is what you get. You blew it. Now you get Mamdani."
Yeah.
Or worse.
Mamdani wouldn't exist if they were stringing up bankers from light posts in 2008.
Trump wouldn't have existed, right? There's all sorts of players, and so another great book. I'm going to give you another great book called the Eric Hoffer's. Oh, God damn it! I can't.
True Believer.
The True Believer. The True Believer, 1953. It is a brilliant book.
I think you've given me that one before.
And it talks about how these mass movements start and how they're fueled. And they're fueled by people who've reached a point where they said, look, anything would be better to try than what I'm experiencing right now. So once the masses become, I'll try anything at this point because, here's one for you. Someone says, well, why would someone play the lottery? So I'll watch some guy at a convenience store walk in. It looks like he can't rub two nickels together. Spend $34 on 2 packs of cigarettes, and then buy a couple lotto tickets. I'm going, there's no way this guy is making sense to me, right? The reason they buy the lotto tickets is because without them, they have zero chance. The lotto ticket gives them some chance.
Snowball's chance in hell, but
here's the funny part of the story. Several independent sources I picked up say the lottos are rigged.
Shocker.
Now, I don't. Well, and then when I'm thinking, how can that be? Well, it's audited, and I go, yeah, audited by what? Bankers, right? Auditors, the guys who audited Enron,
audited by the feds, probably,
right? And then I realized, and I go, we're talking about $1 billion a pop. If you think people aren't trying to figure out how to rig that, you're dreaming. And then I run into a story that makes it more specific, and that is that one of the big ones was won by a company called Zorro something or other trust. That turns out to be an Epstein-tied trust.
That must have been the New Mexico property then, or whatever it was.
So what happens if the population finds out that the win and the guys who win the lottery supposedly go bankrupt like 36% of the time. Now, here's the interesting thing. Maybe they're going bankrupt because the money is being given to sources that are really intended to get the money. They're donating it to the Church of Scientology, for all I know, right? And maybe they wouldn't go bankrupt, but they weren't intended to be the winner. Because I read somewhere where they do a lot of real big stupid donations. They go real big and stupid unless you're funding the DNC or whatever, right? Wouldn't that be wild if we discovered that the lottos were rigged?
I mean,
and the quantity of money,
there's a lot of money laundering going on, right? And there's plenty of, drug cartels, like child trafficking, like the amount of money that flows through the system every day from some of these illicit activities, like basically greasing the wheels of the bank system. I think most people would look at it and say, no, that's not possible. There's no way. It's like, you just don't know history. Like, if you don't think that's happening.
Yeah, everything's possible.
Yeah.
Unless it defies the laws of physics, I can entertain it. Right. You give me, I've challenged people. I've said, give me a keyword. I'll tell you what's wrong with that story. Right. I mean, there's no narrative out there that there's not an alternative narrative that's rather different.
Yeah. And usually pretty compelling in some of these cases.
I know, when you dig into it, you go, oh, I did not see that. I did not expect that. And you find out that some goddamn prosecutor's on the payroll of China or whatever,
Yeah. I guess that's an interesting way, because it happened several weeks ago, but I don't know if you've seen some of those screenshots of apparently conversations about Charlie Kirk and his donors, and their
ties
to Israel. But what's your view on kind of your thoughts on Charlie Kirk, if there's some potential impacts that we could be seeing, if that's kind of going to be a game changer for American politics moving forward?
Well, the person I'd like to get shit-faced her on Truth Serum is Candace Owens, because she's really got to know the backstory. She's been with Charlie for so long. They weren't recently together, but she would know the critical backstory, in my opinion. So there's several theories as to what happened with Charlie Lee Kirk. There is the preferred narrative that crazy shooter shot him. I give that about a 1% probability max. I think that story's fallen apart. I'm not even sure they care if it falls apart, as long as we don't figure out the story. There's just so many things wrong with that plot, including they haven't found the bullet. You can't find the autopsy. His text messages make no sense. I can go on and on and on. All the changing of the clothes and hiding the gun and all that stuff. So none of that makes sense. The number 2 story is Israel capped him, and that's the odds-on favorite, because apparently he was getting huge amounts of money from Israel all along. He was pro-Israel. It's sort of the slobbering level for many, many years, and I don't have a problem with being pro-Israel, but I can be pro-Trump and still say, yeah, but watch the guy. He's fucked up here. You got to be able to criticize these. If you can't criticize a government, you got a big problem. So you show me some organization or something you can't criticize, I'll show you the bad guys. And so, again, 3 or 4 months ago, it appears as though he woke up in some way and really started hammering Israel. And I think they're the odds-on favorite for having capped him. And again, that's a complicated story.
Wouldn't be the first time they hit a U.S. political figure. Yeah.
They tried to sink the USS Liberty. Let's start there. And then the third story, which is related to the second, because it might be the same guys, but the third story is that he was a designated martyr. The post-assassination behavior of everyone is just too weird. And what I'll tell you is I've had people say this is nuts, but I can't find out squat about Charlie Kirk's background. I can't find out squat about Erica Kirk's background. She was Miss Arizona. She has ties with Trump. He has ties with Trump. Charlie never went to college. I don't have a problem with that. But all of a sudden, some big money guy who you can't find out where his companies were, named Montgomery, I think, backs him for TPUSA, which he had founded, made the legal documents for in 2002. So the foundation of TPUSA goes back years before it was actually started. Guy all of a sudden backs Charlie Kirk, and Charlie had learned a lot, and he got really good at his shtick. When I saw him on Tucker, I was more impressed than I had been up until that point. I thought Charlie explained what he was doing pretty well. But I don't think he was that likable. I know that he was getting to the kids, and that was important. He was getting to the younger generation. That's important. But I got to confess that I didn't know he was getting to the kids. This was not like, Jim Jones or something. I didn't. So I was not as big. My first tweet when he got shot was, look, I was not as big as Fan Bud. I thought he was a grifter. I thought he and Candace were grifters. And I thought Candace was just more talented. And then all of a sudden we're hearing all these things he did, and all of a sudden he's just this hero. And then you look at the memorial, you look at the world's response, and you go, holy moly, I just didn't see that coming. Now, where it gets really weird, besides, the fact the shooting's got about 7 different possible shooters, which is what you would do if you wanted to assassinate a guy, is you make sure that there's so many different plot lines you can't sort it out. Like Kennedy, right? There's so many potential candidates for having killed Kennedy, you can never figure out which one. But Erica Kirk's the weird one. Erica has very little background. Her mother turns out to have worked for a tech company that helped do various technological things that built the Iron Dome in Israel and whatever. Erica and Charlie met in Israel. This is kind of problematic. She was supposedly a multimillionaire before they met. She was young. It kind of doesn't make sense. So that's kind of got an Epstein feel to it to me, where there's money that came from where again? She ran an organization in Romania. And if you study child trafficking, which I know you have at least at some level, the Eastern Bloc countries are the hub of child trafficking, not only because they're kind of third world or so you can get them, but also they're blonde haired and blue eyed. So you can get one highly profitable children. She ran some sort of child organization in Romania that seems all wet, warm, and fuzzy when she was 17. What's that all about? Sounds to me like, kind of Ghislaine Maxwell equivalent or something. Mm-hmm. And then I watched her after the shooting. And there's all sorts of videos, people claiming that she's very authentic. I just couldn't see it at all. I saw zero authenticity. Absolutely zero. And I'm not necessarily good at this stuff. I saw a guy do a body English analysis on her, and I found him unconvincing. He said this shows what she was thinking, and this is the authentic part of this thing. And I went to the comment section. The comment section told the story. There was tons and tons of comments, and they all talked about how it was so great that this guy gave an unbiased, authentic, totally convincing story. So the comment section was all about supporting the guy's analysis. They weren't commenting about Erica Kirk.
Just bot comments then.
Yeah. And then once in a while, there'd be a comment from someone saying, I have no idea what you guys are looking at. There's nothing about this story that makes any sense. So, and you look at pictures of her, and she's smiling. And I'm pretty sure if you lost your spouse, the smile would be hard to get for a very long time.
Yeah.
Kind of Robbie Parker. You ever seen the Robbie Parker smile?
Which one was that? Was that the
Sandy Hook?
Yeah,
Sandy Hook.
Is the Duper's Delight smile. Yeah.
Well, and then the guys who actually were dealing with Charlie right after he got shot, there's a picture of them, and they both got smirks on their face. So they seem to have Duper's Delight facial expressions too.
Yeah.
And so I'm of the mind, this is my model, and it's low probability just because it's wacky, but I think it's quite possible that Charlie and Erica were both MK Ultra groomed. that they are a constructed. Now, I challenge the reader, the listener, to go online and search Charlie Kirk's children. Don't do it now. You don't have to. But you will not see their faces. Now, I see commenters saying, well, you'd hide your kids' faces because you're a famous person. I go, but these photographs are not being taken by Erica and Charlie. Let's start with that. And these guys are traveling the country. They're going from event to event to event. And there would be photos of Charlie Kirk, his wife, and their kids because they're family people, right? And you see Barack Obama and his daughters, you see.
Yeah.
And so you can't. So then the question is it possible their faces are hidden? And I don't know how you would bring your kids along with you to all these events, just day after day after day. And again, they'd be photographed. People would be they'd be getting off the plane. People would be taking a snapshot as they come through the gate, and there's nothing. So the question is it possible and some of them are photoshopped away. Some of them, like the kid's wearing a hat and it's over their face and it's a Photoshop and stuff like that. So if you go online, you see nothing but the back of the kids' heads. And again, if Charlie and his wife controlled all photographs on the internet, then that would make sense. But I don't believe they do.
Yeah, it is interesting to see some of the things going on with like the whole narrative. Because like you said, I understand like the video being graphic and some of the reaction to it there, along with the stabbing on the bus like a week earlier, like had people pretty ticked off. But like the whole like not reception, like service thing they had in the stadium, like it just seemed a little weird. Like,
well, I don't even know how you set up that service in the stadium without notice.
Yeah.
Right? If you set up a Rolling Stones concert, you sure as hell wouldn't set it up with 10 days planning.
Yeah.
And so unless you knew it was coming. And it looked like there were pyrotechnics and stuff.
Mega church type activities, basically.
Yeah, and I think the people in the stadium who are grieving were authentically grieving. I don't doubt that part. But I watch her, listeners, if you haven't watched her speech, watch her speech and says this woman grieved. Then post-op, right? She's sitting there at a panel with TPUSA, which, by the way, have been stunningly not informative. Charlie Kirk's mother and father and Erica Kirk's mother and father are AWOL completely since the shooting. There's no sign of any of them. And if there is, someone send me an email because I have not seen it. The parents would be in view. Now, the first decoy, right? The guy stood up and said, I shot him in the middle of the thing. He's got a bit of a history that one history says he's nuts, and it makes sense that he'd be nuts. But there's claims that he's been involved in other events like the Boston Marathon shooting and 9/11 and things like that. And so you go, I don't know who he is, but he supposedly has been charged with child porn on his computer, which is the favorite when you want to give someone guff. Like, for example, Stephen Paddock, the shooter in Vegas, his brother got charged with child porn. You know what that is? That's shut your mouth.
Yeah, we can put stuff on your computer and there's nothing you do to stop us.
Right.
And that's
child porn is so commonly appearing on computers of people who are sort of, ancillary to the, just on the sidelines. But it's like, shut your mouth. We can ruin your life. And by the way, while we wind this narrative, we don't need you out there on CBS saying, hey, this is all fake.
Yeah. That's the warning before you end up like committing suicide by 2 bullets to the back of the head or whatever. Some of the other stuff. Yeah. So it is kind of interesting to see, but that was one of those things where you see it and it's like all over social media, but just something feels off. I've noticed that like I don't always have like the answer or the playbook of what exactly happened with some of these events, but I do feel like I have a pretty good radar for when something feels off. Like there's usually something there, and it might take some time to figure out. Like you figure it out after the fact, but
It's usually
usually
something just doesn't, like, for example, the missing footage of the shooting where they clearly have a camera on the guy, but the 5 seconds that would include the shooting is missing and things like that.
yeah.
The fact that there's 5 or 6 shooter candidates, the fact that they bulldozed the concrete and bulldozed the grass and replanted it some like 5 days later. I've been involved in renovations on a university campus. I can tell you things don't move that quickly.
Yeah.
If we said today we want to renovate the floor of my lab, you wouldn't see
months, if not years.
It would take 2 years to get that job done.
Yeah. No, it is just one of those things where I look at it and there's something that smells about it. But I do want to also get your view on some of the current events going on, Ukraine, what's going on in Eastern Europe, because I think that was we can obviously get into some of the other events, but I was looking at that kind of heading into this year as something that I thought would wrap up and be
absolutely
like over and done with by now, and we're kind of still here dragging things out because I think the Russians rightly don't trust the West to hold up any like deal on their end of the bargain. But what do you kind of see for Ukraine if it just kind of continues in this meat grinder type fashion, if Europe gets more directly involved? I mean, it seems like there's already forces that are pushing for more, but what's your kind of view on how all that develops?
Well, I think if I were to articulate what I'm guessing was your view, was that when Trump got elected, that above all else, he wanted to wrap it quickly. Speed was everything for him. He wanted to come in and he wanted to say, we've got a deal, we're done. I'm the great deal maker. The war's over. Give me the Nobel Prize if you want. I don't care, that sort of thing. Putin, I believe, also wanted it done. He never wanted to destroy Ukraine. He has now managed to do a pretty good job, but that really is because NATO just wouldn't follow the playbook that he imagined when he first moved troops into Ukraine. I read something the other day about how, they're doing tremendous destruction to Russia, and I go, there's not a soldier left in Ukraine. They're all dead. They're all gone. They're recruiting 60-year-old guys to go to the front. So when you see damage being done, these are NATO weapons. These are NATO, and you say, well, NATO weapons given the Ukrainians. Ukrainians don't know how to shoot our weapons. I don't even think they probably are qualified to use our night vision goggles, for fuck's sake, right? And let alone these sophisticated weapons that take 40 guys in some sort of battery somewhere, manning all the computers, shooting a bunch, like a Patriot missiles. Apparently, a Patriot battery requires 40 people. You don't train Ukrainians to do that. You might with big lead time, but you don't when they've all been killed. Now you have to find some more.
Yeah.
So we're playing a very dangerous game of now. So I believe that Trump would happily just give Putin whatever he wants to get it done, and Putin would take what he needed to get it done. My guess is that they can't. You can't just do that. You got to get Europe to sign off, and my guess is Europe signing off is the problem.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like a lot of this stuff has kind of led to a situation where it's almost a testing ground for drone technology, for other things. And I look at it, and I kind of stay up to date with it once a week or once every couple of weeks.
But it's just slowed way down to a crawl now.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a Canadian intelligence. He's not quite intelligence. I'd call him an analyst. And we were talking on the phone one day, and I was optimistic about ending it. He said, Dave, this war is going to go on for years. So that's the intention. Now, one of the things that they're saying is, look, Putin gets what he gets, then the rest we're going to put in NATO. And it's like, okay, so you just told Putin you got to take all of Ukraine. Right? So I can't imagine, NATO's not giving Putin an exit ramp. Israel's not giving the Palestinians an exit ramp. These guys, you can see real negotiations when concessions get made. And if you say, look, I'll behave myself, but you have to do A through Z, and they're all not doable, then you're not negotiating in a good faith. So I think probably at this point, Putin is resigned to just doing sort of a door-to-door taking of Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like it's been better part of 3 years, 4 years now, and it seems like people are just content to have it drag on. And I'm not saying it's going to turn into like a decade plus. I think that's very unlikely, but I mean, we were in Afghanistan for
Yeah,
how long?
exactly. 20 years, right.
So
I think, I think it could go on that long. Yeah, I just don't know. But a lot of dead people,
yeah,
inexcusable number of dead people.
yeah,
There's, that when, we get all upset when Charlie Kirk gets killed, we've killed over 1 million Ukrainians. We've killed them because NATO insisted on having this war. This war did not have to occur at all, in my opinion.
yeah. I think that's becoming more obvious, especially as you start to see some of these narratives change, but doesn't make it any more easy to deal with or easy to talk about. So
No, I know.
it's just another one of those things where you look at it and say, is this the one that like spirals out of control? I think it's more likely to be Middle East if that is the case, but you see that Israel's right back to their activities in Gaza, and they're right. There was the whole flare up with Iran. Everyone was wondering what's going on for about 2 weeks, and then that died down. Right. I have no idea where all that leads, but what's your kind of view on Israel's activity in the Middle East, how that might play out?
Well, seems pretty clear that Israel will push out or kill every last Palestinian. Right. I haven't not seen a shred of evidence that that's not the plan. And there are times where one dark side of my brain said this is what humans have been doing for the last 10,000 years. So why should this be different? Right now I'm reading a book, I can't remember the title, but it's basically a Israel-Palestine primer. And I'm pretty sure it's pro-Palestine. It's short. I'm getting through it slowly, but it's hiding its slant well enough. We're up to the 1920s or something, and the Brits have already screwed the pooch, and you can already see the conflict coming. And so if people can tolerate the idea of just a genocide as being okay, because it's happened over and over and over and over and over, why not there, why not now, then so be it. I had been agnostic on Israel-Palestine since the start of this war. The first thing I ever said in public was in my class. It was the next day or 2 days, I think, later. I said, some of you may know the world has changed. I said, I also am confident that there's people in this room who are on both sides of the story. And I said, what I want to encourage you to do is to be kind to each other. That was what I said to my class, be kind to each other. And it's been okay. I mean, there's been some conflicts on campuses, but nowhere near as many as the APAC says there are. So the propaganda is pretty thick. I don't think Jews are running around campus afraid of being mugged or anything. I just do not believe that's happening. Probably somewhere, but I think it's an excuse. I think it's. Brett Weinstein did a podcast the other day that was really compelling, where he said we had so much capital coming out of World War II and we're burning it. And I think he's dead right. So I was agnostic because I'd read a bunch of books in the Middle East and said, look, I don't understand the Middle East. I just don't get it. And then I realized I don't think anyone does. I think it's an unintelligible region of the world.
By design, too.
Yeah, well, also we're constantly trying to destroy countries that start to stabilize. So that is our foreign policy. Any country that starts to stabilize, we destroy, with the exception of Saudi Arabia for some reason. Maybe it has to do with oil.
Could be.
But there are other oil countries there that we're not at all averse to disrupting. So
yeah, not that size though.
Not that size. So I had been agnostic and saying I'm there's too many people who know more than me. I'm not casting my vote in here. I'm staying away from it. And then I realized probably 6 months ago that I had sort of slowly crept over the agnostic line into sort of a cowardice line, where I realized, I said, you now know that what they're doing is wrong, and you're saying you're agnostic, and you can't do that. So I decided so I think I'm Mike Ferris. I started railing a little on the Israelis for being bastards, and especially Netanyahu. So you got to be careful. First of all, you don't say the Jews because they're just people, right? Your neighbor's Jewish. They're not bad people. You got to be circumspect talking about Israel because they're a country full of people, but it's also now a political structure. And so you can, I don't support shit Bush did, and I don't support shit Obama did, and I don't support shit Biden did, and I don't support everything Trump does. I don't want people hanging that on my ass, right? And it's not like I can vote them out. I don't have that power. So you got to be careful about blaming the people of a country. We're back to the people. And then you get to some leader like Netanyahu, and I can say, yeah, string him up. I mean, he's a bad guy. I asked, this is a nasty question. I asked people, name a country in the Western world, just so that someone can't name some bizarro island in the middle of nowhere, in which the elites don't lie and connive and shape the narrative to optimize their story. That's my standard question. And everyone thinks for a second, oh, there is no country. They always do. Always. And then I say, what happened on October 7th? And you can see they're sitting there going, oh, shit, I just got trapped, didn't I? And then someone will say something like, I remember someone said, well, we know a lot of people died. And they go, do you? Do you really know that? And the answer is no. What I'll tell you is I do not believe that Israel didn't see it coming. It was a classic false flag. But every war we've ever been involved in was a false flag. So again, it's one of those, yeah, that's just what humans seem to do. But it was a false flag. Someone gave a stand down. That's what got Charlie Kirk killed, by the way. That's one of the things he said.
Yeah, we've graduated from just like conquest to we have to be provoked even if it's fake. So
right. And so I have no doubt. And there's this woman named Efrig Fenigson. I never get her name right because her first name and last name are kind of interchangeable in flavor. But she manned the wall for years. She was in the military. And soon after the attack, she and Brett Weinstein did a podcast and very daintily, cryptically, but very clearly said there's no way Israel didn't see it coming. There's no chance. He said nothing happens in the Gaza Strip that Israel doesn't know about. Nothing. They said, oh, they didn't use electronic device. She says, we got eyes and ears everywhere. And you know that's true. My respect for Israel, the highest level of my respect is Mossad. Those guys are the best of the best, right? They know what's going on in the Gaza Strip. So they knew it was coming. They moved the military away from the rock concert. They 8 hours. If you'd said, how long would it take for Israel to mop up 800 Hamas who paraglided into Israel, I would have said, I don't know, 10 minutes. Wouldn't have taken long. There would have been helicopters in there strafing those bastards. Grandmothers would have been blowing their brains out. I just, no way. 8 hours. Marauding, raping and pillaging. And no, I will not believe that. You are going to have, it's going to take an act of God to get me to buy that story.
Yeah.
But that's what happens. Now, I mentioned the Liberty, right? So I had heard about the Liberty. I knew about the Liberty, but I said, okay, I guess I got to read the Liberty this year if I'm going to go honest mode here. USS Liberty in 1967 was a surveillance ship by the United States. It was in the Mediterranean. Everyone knew it was American, had a big ass American flag, had antennas sticking out of everything because it was an intelligence ship. No one in their right mind would touch that thing because it's an American ship, and we know that they know that we destroy them fast. And they got sent into dangerous territory because it was during the 7-day war, whatever number of days, 8-day war, whatever, unescorted. So it's a little suspicious. And the guys on the ship knew they were in kind of risky territory. Israeli pilots for 3 days did flybys. They waved to the pilots. They were sunbathing on the deck. There's a book called Blood in the Water. It's a detailed account of the attack. And then there's documentaries which are not detailed, but they interview the guys on the ship. So the documentaries,
first-hand accounts,
absolutely convince you that these guys knew that the Israelis knew who they were. There's just no doubt. For 3 days, the Israelis would do flybys and stuff, and then all of a sudden, one morning, boom, full-blown attack. Full-blown attack. Hit every watertight door. Every watertight door got taken out in the first 30 seconds. They hit all the communications instantly. What they failed to do is there were something like 24 different communication stations on it. One of them was offline. It was undetected. Some guy, when the ship is getting just pulverized, hardwires it and gets out an SOS. Now, what happened is there's a carrier was supposed to be close by. It was 450 miles away. But they launch aircraft. And at one point, they're getting attacked by all these Israeli aircraft. And all of a sudden, Israeli ships show up, boats of some kind show up. And they're going, fantastic, this is going to end now. And they start shooting torpedoes at the Liberty. There is no doubt that the Israelis tried to sink the ship. Zero doubt. The claim is we didn't know. It was a mistake, a big fuck up. Zero chance that's true. Zero chance that's true. There's a huge cover up. What a shock, right? The cover up could have been covering up what the Israelis did to drag us into a conflagration in the Middle East, which is clearly what the purpose was, right? They wanted us to get mad, to have the justification to go bomb the shit out of anyone that Israel didn't like. Because the SOS got out and his ships got, and planes got released from the carrier, Israel sort of hightailed it. Now, it turns out from the White House, those planes got called back to the carrier. So the evidence that the U.S. knew something was going to happen is sort of high 90 percentile. So we were in on it. It's possible we did not know exactly what they were going to do. It's possible we thought they were just going to strafe the ship and then fly away. But it's also possible, don't forget this is LBJ, so there's no more evil president than LBJ. It's quite possible we intended to send the Liberty in to be sunk and then blame the Arabs and get us into war again. It's possible we knew something was going to happen, but we didn't know quite what, which would be what happened in the Gulf War, according to Scott Horton. I don't buy that either, but I think Scott's being optimistic. But trying to sink the Liberty. So who's guilty? Well, for starters, Israel's guilty. But for who's more guilty? Well, if we call for it, we signed off on it, we're guiltier, right? We did it to our own guys. So a lot depends on the subtleties, which is in the gray zone of what people knew and what they didn't know at the time. But they acknowledge completely they tried to sink the ship. And what they wouldn't acknowledge is that they did on purpose. 2 Israeli pilots would not fire on the ship, and they got sent to prison for 20 years each.
I hadn't heard that part of it.
The guys on the ship who survived were basically told, "We will destroy you if you start opening your mouth." There were admirals screaming at the top of their lungs. That it was not a subtle moment in U.S. history, but we don't hear about it because we're not
our greatest ally.
Our greatest ally in the Middle East.
Yeah.
But I don't accept that. I don't. But it's 67, so it's a long time ago too. But you're lying to us, and I'm getting tired of that.
Yeah, it's seems to be a pattern. We'll find out more details 50 or 60 years later. Pearl Harbor, JFK, whatever it may be. But I mean, I think some of the stuff is happening quicker and quicker. So I don't know if it's going to be another 60 years before you start to find out.
Well, I think the great risk is the digital world is going to usher in an authoritarianism where, everyone knew Stalin was a bad guy. For 70 years, the Soviet Union treated their people like crap. It's not like it was a secret. So there's no guarantee. So I think we're at great risk that the digital world really is it's possible when the internet went live, that was the beginning of the end. It is possible that moment when DARPA uploaded that sucker, that we had charted a course to authoritarianism.
Well, instead of the U.S. making China, or instead of China becoming more like the U.S. is becoming more like China, I guess. So that maybe
is the dreams. I don't know. We might be worse. I don't know. I really don't know.
There's certain things that they don't deal with because they, I think, have leaders that seem to, at least in theory, have the best interest of the country and the people in mind, even if they are more like totalitarian and controlling in how they go about it. But something to be said for having a homogenous.
They're more nationalist.
Yeah.
The big nationalists actually that deserve some kudos, in my opinion, are Putin. It's not that he's a cupcake. I mean, I don't doubt that he's a ruthless bastard. But I also think he does what he believes is in the best interest of Russia. And I think Viktor Orban is a nationalist. And I'm hoping Trump is, but I'm getting nervous.
Yeah. Certain things have happened over the last 8 months where I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's better than Kamala, that's for sure. But
I think so. I think Kamala would have been. There's a chance Trump will say, "Fuck this! I'm doing what I'm doing." Right? Kamala would never, ever, ever do that. She would be the auto pen 2.0. Right?
Yeah. The thing that's interesting there, and kind of gaming out what could have happened, is you have Biden, you have all this other stuff. I think you probably would have seen the regime, deep state, the blob, as some people like to call it, whatever you want to phrase it.
And Mike Benton calls it the blob, I think.
Yeah, I think you kind of look at it. I think that would have been on overdrive if we had Kamala win, but
it might still be as the concern. I don't buy that model, at least not with any confidence, but I'm still waiting for Trump to absolutely prove to me that he's got his heart in the right place.
Yeah.
He boned some stuff so badly, but I guess I should, of course, right? I should probably say, of course he did, right? He's Trump. He is who he is. But, for example, I think the Epstein files. We know there's bad stuff in there. And all of a sudden they're telling us not only, you're not going to get it after promising that we're going to get it, but also saying there's nothing there. If Bongino and Patel had sat up there and said, "Oh, here's the deal. We've seen what's in those files. We can't show them to you. Trust us, it's awful, but we can't show them to you, and you're going to have to live with that." I would be okay. Bongino looked like that was the story.
It'd be better than just assume people are idiots over it, right?
That's right. If they had respected us enough to say, look, we're going to go authoritarian on you here, you're not going to get them. But then Bondi, who I've been critical of since Katrina.
Matt Gaetz would have been better, but go on.
Yes. Yeah, I would have been better. You would have been better. She's, I think, is an idiot. She said something that was not, what it was scripted, whoever scripted it was stupid, but I think she ad-libbed it and boned it when they said, what about the tapes? And she said, they're just child porn. You're not going to get it. And I'm going, are you aware of how unacceptable that answer was? That was the worst of all the answers.
Well, she said stuff about like free speech and some of that stuff too, in like the wake of the Charlie Kirk thing. It's like, why would you say something like that? You know?
Right. So I just don't know. So when I talk to Tucker, he talks to Tulsi a lot. And I got to be careful about speaking about things we talked about off camera. I don't think I'm sabotaging him saying this, but he said that Tulsi, I can't remember the descriptor, but it was, we'll say, flabbergasted at what she's seen. And I said, given that she's an insider already, is this flabbergasted compared to what she expected? And he said yes. So apparently it's way uglier underneath the surface than she could have imagined. We're sitting there at breakfast and he's getting text messages from senators. It was a very surreal experience. So, and then the thing that I didn't think I could talk about, but then he just went public with it. After it was over, we were chatting. We chatted about a number of topics. I mentioned satanic cults, and he went bananas. He started talking about how pervasive they are, how many there are, how broadly based they are. And everything I would say to him, he'd say, oh, it's even worse than that, right? And this went on for like 4. His staff was sitting there watching him bug-eyed. So there's like 5 staff sitting there listening to this conversation. And the reason I can say it is because he just interviewed a young guy who has written and produced a documentary or something about satanic cults and trafficking. So I said, okay, so I can now say that we talked about it. And I haven't finished the interview of the guy yet, so I don't know if they really get into it or not. But so Tucker said, he said, and I know some of these people. So he was saying he knows these guys, and I just saw one of the emails from Hillary on Pizzagate the other day where she talked about sacrificing a chicken to Moloch, and someone asked Grok, "Is this real?" And Grok said yes, but it was just a joke. And I go, but that was the whole goddamn email. There's nothing else in the email. That was not like a punchline that you and I would throw at each other in a podcast, right? That was not just an offhanded comment. It was the email.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, someone questioned that and said, Grok, could you give us the text of the whole email? And there was. And of course, Grok is full of shit on a bad day too. So.
Yeah, most of the AI things are, but it's
right.
Well, it's interesting changes. I guess this will be a good kind of last question to wrap up on, with some of the stuff in AI and the round tripping, like how that kind of ties into what's going on geopolitically, and I think with China too as well. There's some interesting stuff going on there, and this is kind of the last of the 3 major hotspots to talk about is with China. Like, there's more and more talk about the competition there and some of the things. Like, do you have a view on U.S.-China relations, where all that leads, some of the semiconductor and AI, like competition, like AI race, whatever you want to call it? Do you have any view on where that leads?
I would require knowledge of China that I'm just not even close to having. So I don't know if China's behind us or ahead of us or whatever. I just don't know anything about China because they're opaque. I listen to a podcast. I've listened to a bunch of AI podcasts, and they're putting huge sums of money. So, for example, like OpenAI, supposedly a not-for-profit, that's putting in $100 billion or something into AI. And you go, well, where's that money coming from? Who's going to lend them that if they're not for profit, right? But the podcasts that got, so it hit me pretty early on that Google looked like it had a moat that was insurmountable, and now they're in the fight of their life to survive, basically. And their share price isn't reflecting that yet, but it will. They all are going to battle each other, and they can't all win. I'm not sure any of them can win. I'm not sure it's not just going to be like Yahoo, you know, Netscape and things like that. But Paul Kudrowski, who was blogging before they were called blogs, who's a techie, said something that was really important. He said they're putting like this $100 billion in to technology that has the life expectancy of a fruit fly. So this is not like building out a railroad or a grid or something. This is buying a chip that'll be out of date in 2 years. So do you put another 100 billion? And the answer is no. There's no obvious revenue. Now, I easily can picture revenues on sort of the microeconomic level where someone comes up with some way to diagnose a disease or something, right? You know, that sort of thing. So some specific application. But the big LLMs, these gigantic AI programs, it's not obvious how they're going to make money. Now, it wasn't obvious how the internet was going to make money. So, and they have figured it out. But
have you read Cuppy's piece on like the AI, like the numbers and CapEx and how much money they'd have to generate in revenue to make it make sense?
I've been seeing a lot of Cuppy stuff, but I can't say I've necessarily read that piece. If there's one definitive statement by Cuppy,
there's a couple that you put up. I'll send them along with the Einhorn link later. Yeah.
Yeah, I think AI looks like, you know, the dot-com bubble on steroids. But again, unlike the dot-com bubble, there seems to be almost no one out there who believes this to be legit. I mean, no one doubts that AI is potentially important. But the guys who are looking at NVIDIA going, this can't, you know, NVIDIA's revenues are up 25-fold in 10 years. They say, well, how do you not like that? And I go, well, you don't like it in the context of a share price that's up 250-fold. And that means it's got a 10-fold correction just to get back to the valuation of 10 years ago. And so you know, the deal with AMD and OpenAI, where OpenAI was going to buy chips from AMD and get equity in AMD, and I'm going, wait a minute, you're getting equity in the company that's selling you the chips?
Yeah, it's OpenAI, Oracle, AMD, NVIDIA. It's just the merry-go-round.
And so it's as you said, round tripping, right? They're vendor financing. A guy gets great credit. There's a guy named Jack Gambles who calls himself Nobody Special, and he was the one who, I don't know, 2-3 years ago recognized that CoreWeave was all part of a vendor financing scheme by NVIDIA. The NVIDIA CEO had trouble with the law 20 years ago, and here he is again. I now look at the AMD CEO. Maybe this is xenophobia, but I see this chick who looks just like the NVIDIA CEO, but a chick, and I'm going, oh, we're going to see her face on Yahoo homepage every day for the next year and a half. I think this sucker is going to blow up, and it could be the thing that blows up everything, right? It could be the thermonuclear warhead that hit the bubble. But I've been wrong for so long, you know, just a boomer.
Yeah. I think maybe I'll slide into one more question is some of the stuff to do with crypto, which I think is the extension of all this technology, like mania, all that. And like, if you have any thoughts on stable coins and how they've kind of attached themselves to like the treasury market, right? Where you see some of these stable coins like Tether that have a shitload of treasuries and right, I wonder if that's basically going to be an issue at some point in the future, like basically attaching Bitcoin and Ethereum and all these other major cryptos to the treasury market. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, several. I always piss off the hodlers, but I'm sympathetic to their cause. It seems to me that Bitcoin is not a currency now. It's an asset. That's okay. The idea that you can generate demand for treasuries, which seems to be Besant's theory here, by issuing stable coins, somewhere in here, where's the wealth creation? Where's the money come from? There's a Ponzi feel to that to me. It just doesn't make sense. The other day, someone was in my office. The guy was written, I think, it's probably the best book on climate change. It's not out yet. And Tom Kurz. But he said, the government's really clever. They're taking equity in companies like it's some profitable thing, like Intel and mining companies and things like that. They're taking equity, and he says, and therefore they don't have to pay for it. I go, well, where's the money come from? And he couldn't really answer. I said, well, it's if you're getting equity in Intel, it means the Intel shareholders are giving you the money. That doesn't strike me as fair, right? So if you dilute the Intel shares because the government took equity in Intel, all the pension funds that have Intel shares in them just got taxed. So the idea of, I did a poll yesterday, I think it was, that basically says, are you comfortable with government getting into the private sector like this? And only about 10% said yes. I'm not. I think, I know the Swiss did it in a very big way. And you get these sovereign wealth funds. So the sovereign wealth fund is the sales pitch, right? But a sovereign wealth fund comes about. The perfect setup is when you have some nationalized oil field, like in the North Atlantic or something, right? So so you bring in companies to drill what is Sweden's or whatever, Norway's assets. So now you're basically just hiring them, and you're generating revenue. Montana, I think, generated a ton of revenue from the oil sands, right? I remember when I visited Montana, and my colleagues up there in chemistry were all pissed off they weren't spending any of the money. And I go, well, why do you think it's a bad idea that they just bank it for some rainy day? If you start spending it, that's when you get in trouble. So a sovereign wealth fund under those conditions makes sense, right? When you have this newfound wealth, like if you discover big gold deposits on federal lands, sovereign wealth fund, but we're broke, right? We've got huge deficits. You don't get to set up a sovereign wealth fund when you're deficit spending. Otherwise, you're just a hedge fund. You're just buying assets on leverage, printing money. It just smells wrong to me from head to toe. So,
well, I guess the argument is that you have
a bunch of get rich quick schemes. That's what it feels like.
I guess the argument is if you have hundreds of trillions of dollars of assets potentially that are the federal government, then right, that kind of offsets what the liabilities would be. But
where do these assets come from?
Like federal lands and other royalties and
right. But I'm not sure that's what's happening here.
No, exactly. It's very different, like taking stakes in public companies but
like Intel.
Yeah, I mean, that's the. I was talking to a friend. It's like you see what's happened to Intel's share price in the last, call it 2 months, and
makes no sense to me.
Well, it makes sense in that investors want to be close to the government fire hose, right? If
right, but I don't support the government fire hose.
Yeah. Neither do I, but I mean,
I don't want my tax dollars, which is kind of a farcical statement because everything's just on credit at this point. I don't want the U.S. government to be running like a hedge fund.
Yeah.
And if there's one solution to this problem of the government being way out over their skis, and that is to shrink government. That's where the first few months of Trump's administration were looking very promising. But that seems to have vaporized.
Yeah.
Is there anything that's gone? Is there anything that's gone? Can you name something that's really gone?
I think it mostly got shifted around, like with the, we're going after USAID, and it pops up somewhere else. And yeah, so I think that was the thing that I was hoping for, is like, if you can really start to get rid of some of these different departments and different things that we waste money on, like, I understand it's not going to be enough to, like, you really need to cut spending too. But the way I look at it is, like, we can't, as a country, have a functional society if you're spending on what my friend likes to call it, like, gay race communism agendas. And
right,
it just turns into kind of what we have now. So, yeah.
Well, and then, for example, I did a podcast with a guy named Tony Nash, who was way higher up in the system than I realized when I did the podcast. He was at The Economist at one point. And he pointed out that tariffs, for example, first of all, they've been around for a long time, so it's not like this is a new idea. But there are three potential victims of a tariff. One is the supplier, one is the importer, and one is the consumer. To the extent that a tariff is a tax, which I think it is, there are three potential groups who have to pay that tax: the supplier, the importer, or the consumer. To the extent that you collect taxes from all of those groups, in some sense, you're getting some of your taxes paid by other people, by China. Now, if by collecting $1 trillion worth of tariffs, you cut $1 trillion worth of taxes elsewhere, then I'd say China just subsidized my tax base. That's a good deal. And if the importer is somehow foreign, whatever, good deal. So it takes it off of our backs. But that's not what we're going to do. We're going to put $1 trillion worth of tariffs, and we're still going to get taxed elsewhere.
Yeah.
You watching this Mitch Wexler guy talk about municipal debt?
The name doesn't ring a bell. No, but
Mitch Wexler is this guy who's an expert on municipal debt. And apparently, it's like, let's say in Ithaca, we have a high school and we decide we want to put a roof on the high school, or we decide we want to build a new football stadium for the kids or something. We take out debt. We take out some municipal bond. He said if you go across the country and you analyze municipal debt, we are so bankrupt. He cited one town of 8,500 that had $2 billion of municipal debt. And this is hidden from almost everyone. No one knows about this. No one's paying attention to the fact. And we just keep rolling it over. We just keep issuing new bonds, and it keeps going into portfolios. But apparently we are heading for the precipice on municipal debt.
That's why we're going to default tax reassessments, right?
That's right. And it's either going to break the townspeople, break them seriously, or you're going to blow up retirement plans and stuff that are carrying the municipal debt. You got the private equity guys have all these illiquid assets that are not worth what they say, so they're setting up what they call conversion funds or something.
Continuation funds, I think.
Continuation funds, where you basically get new investors to buy the shit off the old investors so they can get the hell out. So you have an office building that you paid $100 million for, it's worth $10 million. You sell it to the new fund for $100 million to the new investors who do not know what they're getting into, probably 401k guys at this point, right?
I mean,
and then the old private equity guys. By the way, the private equity firm charges fees on both, and then the guys can get out of their positions in the original fund. Tell me this is not a capital offense. This is total fraud. complete fraud. This is not just fraud flavored. This is just total fraud. This is, rehypothecation. This is the whole enchilada. And if they do manage to dump it into 401ks, oh my God.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to last long enough. I think the system, I think the AI bubble is going to blow up the rest of the bubble because it's moving too quickly.
It is something that has really seems like it's accelerated over the last year and a half. And I think it is funny to see, like you mentioned private equity, you mentioned some of these other things. Like that was whoever is their marketing guy to change from leverage buyouts to private equity,
same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing.
They made deserve to make a killing on whoever the ad guys were for that change. But I just look at it as you've got so many toxic assets, and it's, I think, basically a minefield for the most part. But are there any other things that you're keeping an eye on, whether it's you mentioned private equity, private credit, some of these different things, obviously the market valuations, but what else has kind of got your attention as we start to wrap up here?
Everything. It's just everything. The world you ever see the 3-body problem or read about it? Read it.
I've read about it.
It's a sci-fi, and it's where the universe is somehow glitching, and that's what it feels like to me. It feels like a sci-fi movie. It just, you look at my Twitter feed and it's nothing but horrific news. It's nothing but bizarre fights between ICE and, it's just nonstop. There's just nothing good in my Twitter feed. And somehow it feels like the system is hurtling off a cliff. Or I'm being duped by, the algo shoving me the clickbait.
I can definitely recommend taking at least a day or two a week and not opening Twitter once. But
right. But the other thing that's noticeable is there's content that you can't get either. The stuff I wrote 10 years ago, I could get information that I now can't get cleanly. It's just you read something now and you go, oh my God, that's awful. And then you find out the next day you'll read something, they'll say, well, that's not true.
Yeah. And
so you don't even, you're disoriented. It's very disoriented. As a professor at a university, what I can tell you is if I had a kid going to college, I have no idea what I'd encourage them to study. It's moving so quickly.
Yeah.
I don't know what would be a safe path.
My guess is engineering related or physical sciences. I think petroleum engineer would be probably, if I could go back and do it again and I was going to college, instead of doing something like the preparation with Matt Smith and what they've talked about. If I was going back to college, I'd probably look at petroleum engineering, to be perfectly honest. So
I did a podcast with Matt Smith about 5 days ago.
Yeah.
He's a smart guy.
I listened to it.
Guy. Yeah. Yeah. Plumber, something like that.
Something boring, but you're not going to get your job taken by AI. So it is really tough though, because the whole the way what college is built on is basically, I think, going to be in danger of changing dramatically over the next 5 or 10 years. Part of it's AI, part of it's...
Well, you can't spend $300,000 on something that won't extinguish that loan.
Yeah. That's another debt bubble to keep an eye on. It's a student debt bubble. So
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think I don't know if you have any other last minute book recommendations, but that can be my traditional closing question. I know you mentioned The Wisdom of Crowds and The True Believer, but do you have another book I should add to my reading list?
What have I read this year that I really liked? Audiobooks. I like to push audiobooks as a category, as a genre. Go to the store, takes 10 minutes. You listen to the book for 10 minutes. Get through a lot of books that way. Nonfiction. If I
Or
had been
fiction.
reading, or fiction, but I like to learn something, but it's getting harder to discern what's fiction and what's not. And in particular, there's a series called the Great Courses series, which are trimester length courses, which you can get audio, and they cost $10 a piece. I mean, this is a trimester length course for $10. This is a Goodwill Hunting moment, the overdue library card. Advice: don't send your kid to college and then stop paying attention. It's way too much money. You got to help them manage.
Yeah.
You got to help them figure it out, because they will squander their way into a profound problem.
Yeah, definitely lots of stuff to think about. I think that's the hardest thing, where I see some stuff going on. I'm just like, there are 5 or 10 different like major things where I look at them like, that's not going to end well. I don't know when, but I have a pretty good idea it's not going to be some rosy scenario. So it's tough, but I think
kind of describes everything.
Yeah. Well, I think we kind of hit on just about pretty much everything under the sun that's been going on, and some of the different things to keep an eye out for. But if my listeners are looking for your social media, shit posting, and entertainment, where can they find you?
Well, I'm at David B. Collum on Twitter. My annual reviews, my pinned tweet. I'm all over YouTube, as you know. Not my own doing, just victimizing others. And besides that, under my desk. So.
Yeah, it's I think you end most of the podcast with under my desk. It's always funny to.
That's right.
Every time, but definitely gave the listeners a lot to think about. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think with that, we'll be wrapping up. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.